I went over to her mom's house, but her best friend was already waiting, and I couldn't look away. The day had started like any other, the quiet hum of the city outside my window providing a steady, almost comforting backdrop to my routine. I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary, until the text came. Her mom. It wasn't something I could have anticipated, a simple message, warm but deliberate, inviting me over for tea. My first reaction was hesitation. Why would she want me to come by? But beneath that hesitation, there was a spark of curiosity, a pull I couldn't ignore. I found myself standing in front of her door later that afternoon, my hand hovering over the brass doorknob. My pulse had picked up without me realizing it, a quiet, insistent rhythm that matched the nervous energy in my chest. I straightened my jacket, running a hand through my hair, and took a deep breath. The smell of freshly baked bread or something equally comforting drifted out as the door opened, and I was immediately met with her mom's gentle smile. She was elegant in a way that felt effortless, her posture straight but relaxed, her movements fluid, and her voice warm, like sunlight spilling into the room. "Come in," she said, her eyes crinkling slightly at the corners. "I hope it wasn't too much trouble." The space inside was cozy. Soft afternoon light streamed through wide windows, illuminating the subtle lavender scent lingering in the air. Books lined the shelves, some stacked neatly, others casually tilted, giving the room a lived-in, welcoming feel. A delicate hum of music floated in the background, something classical, soft, unobtrusive, and the faint aroma of tea leaves steeping added a grounding, almost hypnotic quality to the moment. I stepped in, my shoes making a quiet click against the polished wooden floor. As I handed over my coat, I noticed her mother's eyes drift toward the other side of the room. And there she was, her best friend. Sitting gracefully on the edge of an armchair, she looked up, and our eyes met. She wasn't expecting me, but there was no mistaking the subtle spark in her gaze, curiosity, and perhaps a quiet intrigue. Her presence changed the energy of the room, introducing a tension I didn't anticipate. It wasn't just her beauty, though she had that too, the kind that is refined, graceful, and mature without trying too hard, but the way she carried herself. Every slight gesture, from the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear to the way she shifted her weight in the chair, seemed charged with intention, yet effortless. I felt an immediate, unspoken connection, a mixture of nervousness and fascination stirring inside me. The initial minutes were a dance of introductions and polite conversation. Her mother's warmth made it easy to speak, but my attention kept drifting to her best friend, the way she listened, the slight smile that hovered when I spoke, the almost imperceptible lean toward me during a shared joke. It was subtle, but it left a lingering effect, a sense that something unspoken was quietly threading itself into the room. By the time tea was poured and the clink of porcelain punctuated the soft music, I realized I hadn't been this aware of someone's presence in years. The invitation had seemed simple, but walking in, I knew the afternoon would be anything but ordinary. After the brief but warm greetings with her mother, I finally allowed myself to take in the other presence in the room, her best friend. She was sitting gracefully, her posture relaxed yet perfectly composed, as if she belonged equally to the space and to some unseen world of her own. The first thing I noticed was her eyes, attentive, curious, with a spark that made it impossible to look away. It wasn't just that she was striking, it was the quiet confidence she carried, an elegance that felt natural, not forced. Our introductions were polite, casual, almost rehearsed in their simplicity, but underneath every word, I could feel an electric undercurrent. The way her hand brushed briefly against mine as she reached for a teacup made my pulse jump, though I convinced myself it was accidental. Her laugh, soft, melodic, and entirely genuine, lingered in the air longer than it should have, a subtle echo that seemed to pull me closer. The room itself seemed to shrink around us in those moments. The warm sunlight filtering through the windows painted everything in golden hues, highlighting the curve of her smile, the slight tilt of her head, the delicate line of her jaw as she turned to listen. I became acutely aware of small details, the gentle cadence of her voice, the faint perfume that mingled with the scent of tea and baked goods, the effortless way she let her fingers rest on the edge of the table, never stiff, always natural. Conversation began to flow. At first, it was light, comments on the weather, the latest book she was reading, small anecdotes about her mother. But gradually it deepened, threading through shared observations, mutual humor, and a tentative curiosity about one another. I found myself leaning in slightly, just enough to catch every inflection in her voice, noticing how our knees brushed under the table, the warmth radiating in that accidental closeness. It was a delicate dance of attention. Every glance was weighted, every smile a message that lingered longer than intended. I caught her looking at me when she thought I wasn't noticing, eyes briefly softening, playful, and inquisitive all at once. She moved with ease, yet every gesture felt intentional. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle brush of her sleeve against my arm as she reached for her cup, the quiet way she tilted her body toward mine during a shared joke. In that moment, I became intensely aware of the tension between us. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, a quiet pull, fragile yet undeniable. I wanted to know her, to understand her, to bridge the space that polite introductions and casual conversation had created. And yet, there was hesitation too, respect, caution, and the unspoken boundaries set by the presence of her mother and the unfamiliarity of the situation. By the end of the afternoon, as sunlight dipped lower and shadows lengthened across the room, I realized that the day had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. What began as a simple visit to her mother's house had turned into an encounter that left me both exhilarated and unnervingly aware of every subtle movement, every glance, every fleeting touch. I knew then that this wasn't a casual afternoon. It was the beginning of something more delicate and quietly charged, a slow burn that would linger far longer than I expected. After the initial encounter, the afternoon settled into a rhythm that felt unexpectedly comfortable, almost intimate. Her mother busied herself in the kitchen, leaving her best friend and me in the living room, a space now alive with quiet familiarity. The soft hum of music continued in the background, but the real melody, it seemed, was the subtle cadence of our interaction. I found myself noticing her in ways that made the room feel smaller, warmer, more private. The way her hair caught the sunlight when she shifted, the curve of her lips when she smiled at a joke I hadn't intended to be funny, and the way her presence seemed to pull my attention without demanding it. We began to move together naturally, tidying the space, carrying plates, or arranging cups for tea. At first, the gestures were functional, polite. But then they became accidental opportunities for closeness. Our hands brushed when passing a plate, and a shiver ran through me at the brief contact, a shared awareness lingering long after the motion ended. She smiled at me, not teasingly, not provocatively, but with a gentle acknowledgement, a quiet invitation that left my chest warm and a little breathless. Conversation flowed as naturally as the gestures. We shared small anecdotes, childhood memories, humorous missteps, fleeting regrets, and with each story, a subtle understanding blossomed. There was a comfort in her attention, the way she leaned slightly toward me when listening, her eyes bright with curiosity, as if she wanted to see the world through my perspective for just a moment. I noticed details I hadn't before, the way her fingers traced the rim of her cup, the way her shoulders relaxed when she laughed, the slight tilt of her head as she considered something I said. Every movement carried a weight I didn't fully comprehend, but it made me increasingly aware of the pull between us. The physicality of proximity became a language of its own. Sitting near her on the couch, I could feel the warmth radiating from her side. Our knees brushed lightly when she shifted, and a quiet tension hummed through that small, accidental touch. She didn't recoil, and neither did I. Instead, it was as though the world contracted to the space between us, charged with a silent acknowledgement of mutual attraction. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable, a slow burn that made each glance, each brush of hands, feel monumental. Even in silence, there was a conversation. Shared glances across the room, the way she lingered just slightly when handing me a plate, or how her laughter softened when I responded to a story, all spoke louder than words. I realized I was acutely aware of her breathing, the quiet rhythm of her movements, the faint scent of her perfume blending with the tea and baked goods. Every detail was magnified, every interaction layered with unspoken meaning. By the time her mother returned with tea and the aroma of freshly baked cookies, the room had shifted. We were no longer simply two people visiting a home. We had begun to inhabit a shared space of understanding and subtle intimacy. The attraction simmered quietly, respectful yet undeniable, leaving me both exhilarated and hesitant. That afternoon, in ordinary tasks and casual conversation, something extraordinary had begun to take root, a connection delicate, electric, and quietly insistent, promising that the days ahead would be far from ordinary. As the afternoon light softened into a warm, golden hue, the rhythm of the visit shifted. Her mother had stepped away briefly to tend to something in the kitchen, leaving the two of us alone in the living room. The air, once filled with polite conversation and laughter, became quieter, not uncomfortable, but charged with a new intimacy. I realized I was acutely aware of every movement she made, the subtle way she adjusted the cushion behind her, the delicate tilt of her head as she watched me, the way her fingers absent-mindedly traced the edge of the teacup. It started with a casual question, meant to fill the silence, but it opened a door. I shared a minor regret, a story from my past that I usually kept tucked away, and I noticed the way she leaned in slightly, her eyes fixed on mine, her expression open and inviting. There was a softness there, a quiet vulnerability that made my chest tighten. For a moment, it felt like we were the only two people in the world, suspended in that golden room, where words carried weight and silences spoke even louder. She responded with her own memory, hesitating at first, as if testing the waters of honesty. Her voice was calm, measured, but there was a tremor beneath the surface that made it real, immediate, and profoundly human. I could see the effort in her composure, the careful grace in how she revealed herself, and it drew me closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. There was a subtle courage in her openness, a willingness to be seen fully, and it made the air between us feel warmer, charged with an unspoken understanding. As we shared stories, a natural rhythm emerged, the delicate back and forth of disclosure and listening. I found myself noticing details I hadn't before, the softness of her voice when she laughed quietly, the slight brush of her hand against mine when emphasizing a point, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners with genuine amusement. Each gesture, each fleeting touch, felt deliberate yet effortless, layering the room with tension that was as thrilling as it was gentle. At one point, our hands met, not in a deliberate gesture, but as an unintentional touch while passing the tea tray. There was a pause, a shared awareness of the connection, and neither of us pulled away immediately. Instead, it lingered, a moment stretched thin with the quiet acknowledgement of something more. Her warmth radiated through that brief contact, and I felt an unspoken invitation, a gentle, wordless suggestion that this closeness could be explored, that our attraction, though tentative, was mutual. The conversation shifted seamlessly from light-hearted recollections to more personal truths, each revelation threading us closer together. There was no rush, no overt declaration, just a slow unfolding of trust, the kind that leaves the heart both vulnerable and alight. By the time her mother returned, the dynamic had changed subtly but irreversibly. The room now held a quiet intimacy, a gentle promise beneath the surface tension, as though the day had progressed from polite acquaintance to something charged with the potential of deeper connection. In that half hour of quiet confessions, I realized that the slow burn attraction was no longer just a feeling. It had begun to take form, tender and deliberate, leaving both of us aware that the space between us was shrinking, and that the unspoken possibilities were as compelling as the words we shared. The evening had settled into a calm, golden hush, but the room felt anything but quiet to me. After our brief, vulnerable confessions earlier, the air between us seemed charged with an invisible current, subtle yet impossible to ignore. Even in casual conversation, I noticed the way our attention seemed magnetically drawn to one another. Her presence was both soothing and electrifying, a paradox that made my chest tighten in ways I hadn't experienced in years. We moved about the room, helping with small tasks, clearing cups, adjusting cushions, arranging the remnants of tea. Each action was punctuated by fleeting, accidental touches, the brush of her fingers against mine while reaching for a plate, the moment our knees lightly collided as we stepped around the same chair. Each contact, though seemingly innocent, resonated in a quiet, almost startling way. My pulse quickened, and I could feel the warmth of her proximity in a way that made the familiar surroundings feel intensely intimate. Her laughter, soft and melodic, seemed to linger just a fraction longer when I responded to a joke. I found myself watching her almost unconsciously, the way her hair caught the fading sunlight, the subtle movement of her lips as she spoke, the gentle tilt of her head when listening. Every small gesture carried a weight, a quiet magnetism that left me aware of her presence even when she wasn't speaking. It was as though the room itself had shrunk, concentrating every sound, every glance, every movement into the space between us. The tension wasn't just physical, it was emotional, too. Her eyes held questions she didn't voice, curiosity that mirrored my own, and an understated acknowledgement that something unspoken was building. I noticed the way she lingered in my presence, how her posture subtly shifted toward me, as if instinctively closing a space that had always seemed comfortably separate. There was hesitation too, a polite restraint that made the tension sharper, more tantalizing. We were aware of the attraction, yet the boundaries of decorum and circumstance held us just beyond the point of indulgence. Even the simplest gestures became charged with meaning. A hand resting briefly on the table near mine, a shared look over a teacup, the accidental brush of fingers while moving a chair, each small contact seemed to vibrate with possibility. I became acutely conscious of the rhythm of her movements, her breathing, the faint warmth that lingered when she moved past me. It was impossible to pretend the connection wasn't there. It hummed in the air, electric and restrained. By the time her mother returned to the room, the quiet intimacy we had cultivated became a delicate performance of casual politeness. Yet even in the presence of another, the subtle tension persisted. The glances we exchanged, the near brush of hands, and the soft smiles carried a private language that only we understood. That evening, the slow burn attraction had grown unmistakable, a gentle, simmering fire that demanded attention, yet remained patient, waiting for the right moment to ignite fully. Every gesture, every word, every pause was a promise, not yet realized, but impossible to ignore. The pull between us had become tangible, shaping the atmosphere, and leaving me with the undeniable sense that something extraordinary was quietly unfolding, just beneath the surface. The evening had deepened into a quiet intimacy that made every sound seem sharper, every movement heavier, every glance more meaningful. Her mother had retreated to another room, leaving us alone in the gentle hush of the living space. The room felt smaller now, as if it had contracted around the two of us, concentrating the warmth of the fading light and the subtle fragrance of tea into a private world where only we existed. I became acutely aware of the rhythm of her breathing, the way her fingers rested lightly on the armrest, and the gentle slope of her shoulders as she leaned slightly toward me. We had been talking for hours, sharing stories that ranged from light-hearted memories to quiet reflections on life's uncertainties. But now, the conversation shifted, slowing, stretching the space between words. There was a pause, a gentle silence that was neither awkward nor empty, but dense with unspoken meaning. I noticed the way her eyes searched mine, hesitant yet unflinching, as if trying to read the truths I wasn't yet ready to voice. And I felt it too, a pull, subtle and magnetic, that demanded acknowledgement. The first contact came almost imperceptibly. A hand brushed against mine as we both reached for the same book on the side table. The brief warmth sent a shiver through me, a spark that lingered far longer than the motion itself. I didn't pull away, and neither did she. Our fingers hovered close for a heartbeat longer than necessary, a delicate hesitation that seemed to suspend time. There was a quiet surrender in that moment, not of impulse, but of mutual understanding, an acknowledgement that the emotional tension between us had reached its peak. We moved closer, almost without realizing it. Sitting side by side on the sofa, our shoulders touched lightly, a subtle warmth radiating between us. Her hair brushed against my arm, soft and fragrant, and I could feel the careful rhythm of her breathing mingling with my own. Words seemed inadequate now. Instead, we communicated through gestures, glances, and the quiet energy that filled the space. She tilted her head slightly, eyes locked on mine, and I caught the faintest tremor in her lips, a vulnerability that made my chest ache with longing. For a long moment, we simply existed in that space, a shared intimacy that needed no words. Then, softly, almost hesitantly, she rested her hand atop mine. The warmth of her palm pressed against mine, grounding me, connecting us in a way that was both electrifying and tender. It wasn't rushed, it was deliberate, patient, and full of meaning. I felt the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat beneath her touch, a rhythm that mirrored my own, and in that moment, the emotional climax became real, a silent confession of desire, trust, and the possibility of more. The world outside the room seemed to vanish. The golden light of the evening, the faint music in the background, even the scent of tea and pastries faded into a soft haze. All that remained was the unspoken bond, the slow-burn connection that had grown from fleeting glances to lingering touches, now fully recognized. In that quiet, suspended moment, everything was both fragile and certain. The attraction was mutual, the desire real, and the possibility of what could come next shimmering just beneath the surface. The evening had shifted into a calm, tender quietness that felt like the world itself had slowed to match the rhythm of our hearts. After the emotional intensity of the earlier moments, everything now carried a gentle warmth. Her mother had returned to the kitchen, leaving us with a brief pause before the night fully settled in. But the room felt different, alive with unspoken understanding, the soft echo of laughter, and the delicate traces of a connection that had finally found its footing. We sat together on the sofa, our shoulders brushing lightly, a simple touch that felt both grounding and exhilarating. The subtle warmth of her presence next to me seemed to fill the entire space. Our conversation, once charged with tentative confessions and lingering glances, now moved easily, naturally, small anecdotes, shared smiles, and comfortable silences that no longer carried hesitation but quiet contentment. I noticed the way she leaned slightly toward me, the gentle brush of her hair across my arm, the way her fingers lingered near mine without pressing, yet never fully leaving my awareness. In that moment, everything felt balanced. The slow-burn tension that had threaded through the day had softened into a steady, glowing intimacy. There were no rushed gestures, no dramatic declarations, just a quiet, deliberate closeness that made the ordinary extraordinary. We shared a warm cup of tea, passing it back and forth, laughing softly at minor clumsiness, enjoying the simple joy of being present with one another. Every glance, every subtle touch, every soft smile carried the weight of shared trust, mutual desire, and deepening connection. If her best friend was present in this version of the story, she now moved closer as well, completing the circle of intimacy. The atmosphere was no longer charged with tension, but with comfort, acceptance, and the quiet thrill of belonging. The three of us shared stories, small jokes, and the unspoken acknowledgement that something meaningful had grown from chance, from fleeting touches, and from the slow unfolding of hearts. It was natural, unforced, and profoundly satisfying, the kind of connection that lingers long after the moment has passed. We lingered in the room as the golden evening light gave way to the soft glow of lamps, the space around us filled with a warmth that was more than physical. It was emotional, deeply human, and fully present. I became aware of the subtle rhythms of shared breathing, the gentle press of a hand against mine, and the way each of our movements seemed to mirror the other in perfect harmony. It was a dance of closeness, a celebration of mutual understanding, and a quiet promise that the bond we had begun to forge was just the beginning. By the time the night drew to a close, there was no sense of urgency, no abrupt ending, just the peaceful certainty that the slow-burn connection had reached a natural, emotionally fulfilling conclusion. We rose together, exchanged soft, lingering touches, and shared a moment of quiet acknowledgement, a promise to continue exploring this delicate, profound intimacy in the days to come. The warmth lingered long after the visit ended, the memory of shared glances, subtle touches, and quiet confessions settling into a gentle, lasting glow. In the end, it was a story of connection, patience, and subtle desire, a quiet, emotionally satisfying resolution that left everyone involved with a deep sense of contentment, belonging, and the quiet thrill of love discovered slowly, deliberately, and tenderly. If you enjoyed this slow burn story of unexpected connections and quiet romance, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a tale of love that unfolds at its own pace. Share your thoughts in the comments. Who was your favorite character, and which moment made your heart skip a beat?